IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. My name is Shambhavi, and today we are going to be discussing about an agreement that India and Australia had committed to last week. This was on 4th of June, and after a long time, I actually got to hear about something that was not COVID related, which got me very excited. India and Australia have signed a bunch of agreements. We are looking at a framework arrangement on cyber and cyber-enabled critical technology cooperation. We're looking at an MOU on cooperation in mining and processing of rare minerals. We're looking at cooperation in defense science and technology. But I think the one that is most exciting and that we're going to focus on today is a mutual logistics support agreement, which will basically facilitate reciprocal access to military logistics facilities. So what will be the impact on that? Why has it been done now? To discuss that with me, I have today the China dude, Manoj Kevaramani and Aditya Ramanathan. Hi guys, welcome to ATP.
Hello.
Hey.
So can you guys basically tell us what is happening with this agreement? What does this mutual logistics support agreement basically do?
Thanks, Shambhavi. What a mutual logistics support agreement really means is that India and Australia can basically use each other's military facilities, and this would apply primarily to their navies and their air forces. So India could use, for instance, Australian facilities to restock, resupply, repair its ships. It could use its air bases to refuel airplanes, and Australia can do likewise. What this would mean practically, of course, is something specific. Obviously, India and Australia are very far away, but what it would mean is that Australia can use Indian facilities primarily in the Nicobar Islands, and India can use the Cocos Islands, which are a Australian overseas territory in the Indian Ocean, and not too far away from the Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Sunda. So this would basically provide both the armed forces it would provide their navies sea legs, and it would potentially increase the range, the patrolling range of some of their aircraft.
Yeah, I think, how this operates, Aditya has explained really well, so I don't want to sort of get into that. But I think what we need to look at is the sort of broader strategic messaging that's coming out, that came out from the meeting which yielded this agreement, which was a virtual summit between the Indian Prime Minister and the Australian Prime Minister. I mean, if you put aside the noise of, although it's quite entertaining, but if you put aside the noise of the samosa and khichdi diplomacy that we heard about in the media, that's an effort in trying to build familiarity between the two countries even more so. But the broader sort of strategic framework here is this, right? There were two big documents that were signed. One was a comprehensive strategic partnership, and the other was also this shared vision for maritime cooperation, of which this agreement that you mentioned is sort of helps operationalize this particular vision. The idea here is that India and Australia are gradually, and this has been a development over the years, there's been a linear sort of progression towards building a closer relationship with India. And this is sort of the first big steps in that direction, where you're actually operationalizing some of this. And this sort of this congruence between India and Australia in large parts is driven by trade realities and also geopolitical realities. A couple of years ago, you saw the Australian Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade put out a document, strategy document, India 2035. And the idea of the document was that you need to have 3 pillars of cooperation with India going forward, and we need to prioritize our development with India. The first pillar was economics, which is about increasing trade. There's a massive scope for India and Australia to increase its trade. It's still very, very small in the larger scheme of things. Bilateral trade in goods and services, just about $30 billion. The other component is obviously geopolitics, and this is about the broader Indian Ocean, the Indo-Pacific, a shared sense of values, the rise of China, and all those sorts of things. And also sort of there's a component of, how middle powers are sort of going to want to engage with each other to build a better relationship. given that we're increasingly entering a world which is dominated by two great powers, China and the US. The last sort of aspect of this is people-to-people engagement, and which is where that entire samosa khichdi business comes into play. It's about building familiarity, but the more tangible aspect of that would be tourism, education exchanges, and things like that. And I think the fact that the Australians have had that vision, whereas we have not had that vision. So I would sort of put a lot of emphasis on Australia sort of driving this. But I think increasingly in India also there's a realization that we need to be doing this. And I'm sure we'll talk much more about this going forward.
Yeah, I was going to say that there seems to be a lot more thrust on this cooperation from Australia's side. Even the India 2035 document that you spoke about, obviously it came from Australia, and it is fairly detailed in terms of the states they want to work with, the kind of people they want to work with. I remember the science and cooperation part that they had in it, and it spoke about plans for how to work with universities, how to work with the private sector. So that there clearly seems to be this increased focus on cooperating with India from an Australia point of view, right?
Yeah, I think there is. And I think there are a number of imperatives that are driving it. One is obviously to diversify their sort of economic relationships, and seeing India as a rapidly developing economy with lots of. I mean, in the paper that you've spoken about, it talks about converting potential into reality, right? So there's a lot of potential that you're seeing, and there's a pathway that they're identifying to convert that potential into some sort of reality, and therefore that thrust comes. And this comes given the fact that you've seen an America which has been, you've seen a general sort of sense of decline in the West in terms of economic development and growth, although the US economy is doing fairly well. But you've seen that sort of decline over the years. China has been a resurgent player, and Australia's economy is quite dependent on China for many sort of components. It's one of the largest trading partners. It's a massive investor. There's education, where you get
a lot of students that come.
Exactly. So I think that sort of to diversify that and identify the risks that are associated with this sort of over dependence on one entity, and also the unreliability of the US under Trump. All of that sort of creates this sense that you need to have more balancing partners with sort of middle powers. And India is among those key middle powers that the Australians have looked at and said that we need to be doing this, particularly given the fact that, there's a linkage in terms of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, I think the influence of the Indian Ocean does make a lot of sense. I mean, I think Australia has, and in no uncertain terms, looked at China as a threat. We saw activity in the islands in the Indian Pacific Ocean over the last couple of years. Vanuatu, for example, where both Australia and China have been trying to kind of balance their forces, and it's like a chess game, right, with the islands, and they're just trying to figure out how to exert power in those areas through investments, through economic incentives in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think it's also a case of Australia sort of in some ways coming into its own, identifying itself as a key middle power, and therefore then defining a space for itself in what is emerging in terms of the new world order. Aditya?
Yeah, I think you've explained this really well. And, I'll just add that the country that's really been reticent in this whole India-Australia bilateral relationship has actually been India. It's really our fault. I think India's tended to look at Australia with a fair deal of suspicion. In the old days, basically Australia is where you sent an outspoken general to serve as High Commissioner. I think that we've underestimated the potential of Australia. We have mistaken subtlety in Australian thinking or differences among Australian strategic thinkers, international relations thinkers, for being, some sort of, we looked at it very crudely as being, weakness or kowtowing to China and something like that. And it's really Australia that has helped drive this relationship. And Australia actually provides a lot of opportunities to India. As Manoj said, we actually have a fairly robust economic relationship with them that actually has huge potential. We talked about, students, Indian students going to Australia get a lot of attention, but a lot of our relationship with Australia is actually merchandise. The Australians sell us a lot of coal, and we actually sell them back refined petroleum products. So we do the value addition there. There is great potential in services, for example, between India and Australia. So there is an economic partnership over there that is waiting to be strengthened. Also, as Manoj pointed out, Australia is really one of those critical middle powers that are going to play a major role in what we now call the Indo-Pacific for decades to come. So Australia is one of maybe like 3 or 4 countries. The others would be Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, and we have, by the way, such logistics agreements with all those other 3 countries, and we're belatedly getting into one only today with Australia. So I think that this is really a partnership that where we have been remiss in not pursuing, and hopefully here on India shows more initiative in this relationship.
I mean, like Shambhavi also mentioned, like Aditya, you also mentioned the one sort of big, there are sort of the dynamics of the bilateral relationship are their own, but there is also that big thing that we've spoken about, which is China, which sort of hangs over everything. And, it's interesting that this virtual summit came at a point of time where, and this sort of becomes a cliche every year or every maybe 6 months, right? Australia-China relations have hit a new low. They seem to hit a new low every 6 months, particularly over the last couple of years with the controversy over, influence operations in Australia, potential sort of united front activity, the attempts at influencing elections and all of that. I mean, we've seen all of that, and there's a robust debate within Australia about how should the relationship with China be looked at. But just to sort of paint a picture of the last couple of years, I mean, Australia-China trade, bilateral trade is at about 235 billion Australian dollars. That's about 170 odd billion US dollars. So it obviously far eclipses what India-Australia trade is. So it's obviously a significant trading partner. But then you look at things like just the last couple of weeks, you've had tensions over the origins of the virus, which is something that Australia was pushing for a probe on. Although Australia there were issues between the Australian government and the US administration because from what we understand, the Australian government wasn't necessarily happy with the sort of confrontational, conspiratorial approach that Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo were taking, and they wanted some sort of an investigation. But they were one of the leading countries which were pushing for this investigation at the WHO. And that, it's interesting that the Chinese eventually signed on to that investigation themselves, yet they imposed costs on Australia in terms of banning beef imports from Australia, increasing tariffs on barley. And obviously the official explanation for all this is sort of all strange sort of other issues about quality and, things like that. But, sometimes Chinese media can sort of reveal, what's really happening. And this is obviously the timing tells you that it's linked. And then you had in the last week and a half or so, you've had 2 notifications issued. One is a travel advisory from a tourism point of view, which is strange that this advisory is coming right now, given that really no tourism is happening right now in the world. And I don't see how anytime soon you're going to see tourism. But the first of those advisories spoke about, tourists need to be careful going to Australia because of racism. And likewise, just I think yesterday or day before yesterday, you had an advisory by the Chinese Ministry of Education saying that students need to be careful going to Australia and need to make your choices carefully about going back to Australia owing to racism again. Again, this is a huge economically coercive lever that the Chinese are sort of deploying here. And the objective is essentially to get Australia to sort of heal in some ways. And what you're seeing is the Morrison government saying things like, we're not going to be compromising on values because of economic hits. But at the end of the day, economics matters. And if you're not going to diversify and be prepared for the shocks that the Chinese can impose on you and deleverage in some ways, you're going to really struggle. So some of this is sort of shaped by that dynamic of trying to deleverage yourself from China while not necessarily decoupling entirely, so that you can actually sort of have the room for maneuver, which you right now seem to struggle to have. I mean, we saw this also last year on 5G. Australia was one of the first countries to ban 5G, or at least 5G in terms of Chinese components in 5G, after having conducted a thorough probe. And there was also some degree of, sharing of that experience with other players saying, look, this is what we understand as the problem, and we would advise you also to consider it very seriously. And that didn't sit well with the Chinese either. And so I think this has been a sort of attempt at balancing some of the threats that arrive from Beijing.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of these diplomatic wars that have been going on over the past couple of years, at least, right, between China and Australia. We have had revoked visas, we have had cancelled visits. And I think even this visit, in this bilateral agreement between India and Australia was taking shape for a long time. I think first Scott Morrison's visit to India got cancelled because of the fires that they had. And then obviously because of the lockdowns, which is why they moved us to a virtual meeting eventually. But I think it also signals the urgency that the countries feel that we need to put on, at least get started on doing some of these activities, which I think brings me to one of the major activities that India does do. And now there's talks of whether India will include or extend an invitation to Australia for Malabar 2020. Aditya, so can you tell us a bit more about what Malabar 2020 is about and why there's rumors going on about including Australia and it could be a step forward in India-Australia relations?
Yeah, this is one of those old chestnuts between India and Australia. It goes really back to 2007 when the Malabar exercise started, and India did not invite Australia at that time. And there's been a lot of blame between India and Australia on this. Frankly, I think that Indians tend to forget that the government at that time was under political pressure internally and so on. What India has been hesitant to do is to present the Malabar exercise as a sort of quad exercise, the quad being India, Australia, the United States, and Japan. Presently, the United States and Japan are regular participants in the Malabar exercise. Australia is not. What India does is it has a separate biennial exercise called AUSINDEX, which it holds with the Australians. But this year, it is possible that India will invite Australia and Malabar, that the Malabar exercise will basically have all the 4 quad countries in them. If India does so, it will be primarily meant as a political signal to China. Beyond that, operationally, it doesn't really make a huge difference because India and Australia do exercise together. Their navies are fairly familiar with each other.
Okay, so building on that, so what other steps can India take basically to extend our economic cooperation with Australia? I know we have a few free trade agreements going on. We are obviously part of the Australia group, and there are various other small groups that we are part of where we have this bilateral or multilateral treaties going on with Australia. But what else can we do?
Well, the one difficult task that we can do is, of course, get back into negotiations for the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which will bring us into a trading framework that will involve trade with Australia. Beyond that, I think we should also look at some specific sectors where we and Australia can collaborate. I think IT is a major opportunity for both countries. In 2014, the two countries actually signed an agreement on uranium supply. Now, Australia has not so far supplied uranium to any country that is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But that has changed now, and Australia has actually started supplying that fuel to India. I think that is an opportunity that we should actually expand further. And then finally, there is tourism. Indians go to Australia, but we should also get more Australians coming to this country. And I think that we're actually at the early stages of what is potentially a much larger economic relationship.
Right. And we obviously have education, which might be a big chunk of cooperative activities on. Also, this agreement on the rare earths thing, because obviously we get a lot of rare earths from China. Currently, I think about 90% of our imports come from China, and there has been some talk about whether we can have an agreement with Australia to mine rare earths in Australia. Which might also be another opportunity that we can think of.
Absolutely. This is a case of the political and economic stars aligning, right? Today, we do very much want to diversify away from China, or at least create alternative supply chains, especially on critical resources. And rare earths are a perfect example. Australia is a country that is truly blessed with natural resources. I shouldn't say hell. So we import a lot of coal from Australia. In fact, that's the biggest component of what we import from that country. And rare earths are definitely another big opportunity.
Right. Cool. So I think Australia is a friend that we should definitely think about deepening our ties with. Thank you very much, Aditya and Manoj, for that insightful conversation. Thank you for listening in, and do stay plugged in for more episodes of All Things Policy. Thanks, guys.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. It really has been a great week this week. We've had two of our first international cricketers show up, people who have played for their respective sides. We had W.V. Raman come on Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast. If you haven't heard that, you should be listening to that if you enjoy cricket. It's really one of the best out there. And you should also definitely check out Monty Panesar, who showed up on Cyrus Says. That was another really interesting conversation that occurred. If you haven't been listening to a few of our shorter shows, please do that as well. Ashish Vidyarthi has been doing a great job for us. We got 30 episodes now on Begin the Journey. I think you really enjoyed that show. If you haven't listened to it, it helps you with understanding what's going on in this tough time and how to deal with it from a mental health perspective. We've also had some really fun stuff come up on the Smile India show. Shifa's been doing a lot of really good stories over there. Things would just make you happy, so definitely do check that out. And on the more serious side, make sure that you're checking out our regular shows like the Pragati podcast, All Things Policy. They're definitely going to keep you up to date on what's going on in this COVID world. And thanks for listening, and we hope to catch you again next week.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.